Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast, a victorious post-game podcast after a sixth consecutive win for the Timberwolves, holding yet another opponent under 40% shooting. Anthony Edwards, another fantastic all-around game, but this one is all about the defense. That's the headline for me. We'll break down Rudy's impact, Cat's impact on both ends of the floor, Ant's fourth quarter versus Draymond. We'll talk Chris Paul. It's all upcoming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code, all lowercase, LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend. And this is, of course, a Victory Monday. A big weekend. The Wolves won Friday night against the Spurs. They won Sunday. Their sixth consecutive win against the Golden State Warriors. We're going to break that one down here today. First of all, though, a big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right, there's so many places I could start with this one. The headlines, I'll give you several headlines here right off the top. It's a good thing that nobody cares about print headlines anymore and having to actually come up with one, because I would struggle with that. Clearly. Number one, the Wolves have won 6 straight. That's the biggest thing. Number two, 5 out of 6 opponents now, the Wolves have held under 40% shooting. And another thing I realized when I was going through this, that's 5 of the last 6 opponents under 40%. Overall this year, 5 of 9. But if you go back to the beginning of the season, there were 2 other games where the Wolves held their opponent to 40.2% and 40% respectively. I think one was the Toronto game and one was, I believe, the Miami game. So, put another way, in 9 games so far this season, the Wolves have held an opponent below 41% shooting 7 times, which is remarkable. And I know at a glance, you look at this, you say, 116, 110, it's a barn burner, right? Defense, maybe wasn't as good in this game. That's not the case, because what matters is defensive efficiency. It's not strictly points per game. There's a reason why we measure things with defensive rating, primarily opponent effective field goal percentage. And, there's noise in some of that stuff, but that's why defensive efficiency matters more. The Wolves were killed on the defensive glass, or the offensive glass, I should say. We'll talk more about that. And obviously that's part of defense, and I'll get on my mini soapbox about that again, as I do every so often. But the Wolves were in the Warriors jerseys all night. They were just making things extremely difficult. We're talking about a team that has the best shooter of all time and another probably, I don't know, I don't want to turn this into a where does Klay rank among all-time shooters, but another, I'll call him a generational shooter in Klay Thompson, right? And the Timberwolves held this Golden State Warriors team to 38.5% shooting in this game, 27.9% from deep. And again, the 5th team out of the last 6, they've held below 40% shooting. Steph had 38, and on 25 shots is fairly efficient. A lot of that's because of the 12 free throws, and in the fourth quarter, it was suddenly, if you touch Steph Curry, it's in any way, it's a foul call. Tends to happen in fourth quarters of games against the Warriors. I get it. It's part of it. It's baked in. Not a surprise. I'm not going to complain about it beyond stating the obvious, but there were a couple of those you're in his vicinity, so it's a foul. 38 points on 25 shots for Steph, but he had to work for it. He was also 5 of 13 from 3, which is fine. But for Steph, you live with that. If he's 5 of 13 from 3, and he turned it over 5 times to only 3 assists, because the Wolves turned, and now to be fair, so far this season, Golden State's offense has been only Steph. If I'm not mistaken, he's the only player all season for them to score more than 20 points in a game, which is, I'll leave that for the guys at Lockdown Warriors to talk about. but nobody else on the Warriors has scored more than 20 points in a game so far this season. The Wolves knew it was all about Steph. And so the Timberwolves had Jaden McDaniels guarding Steph for the majority of the game. They had Anthony Edwards on Andrew Wiggins for most of the game. By the way, Andrew Wiggins had 6 points in this one against his former team. Nobody's really talking about the Wiggins thing anymore. 6 points on 7 shots for Wiggins. That's the only time we're going to talk about Andrew Wiggins today, which says a lot about his performance. But the Timberwolves were all over Steph Curry. They did a good job with Klay Thompson. Klay, again, 5 of 16 shooting. So combined, if you told me that the Wolves held Steph and Klay to a combined 16 of 41 shooting, that's a nice night. And the Wolves would have had a pretty good shot at winning. Sure enough, they did. And by the way, they should have won by more. If you didn't watch this game, the Wolves were up 10, 12, something like that with a couple of minutes left. And the Warriors got it down to 4 because the Wolves messed up some execution stuff, took their starters out when they were up by 10 with 2 minutes to play, something like that. And all 5 guys on the floor were bench guys for the Wolves. They had a turnover. Kyle Anderson missed a pair of free throws. They gave up a couple of threes to Podziemski, I think is how you say it, the rookie who had played 1 minute prior to tonight or prior to Sunday night for the Warriors. It doesn't matter. I don't want to dwell on that. It wasn't ideal. Neither was the end of the Spurs game Friday, but that stuff in past years, I would have spent more time on that. That's not where I'm at right now for the 7-2 Wolves team. I don't want to do the full game flow, but the cliff notes on that are the Wolves, early was very competitive both ways. Wolves were down a bucket after the first quarter. Second quarter, they started to figure some things out on offense. The early stage of the game, the biggest problem for Minnesota was simply defensive rebounding. And it was a major issue. And I need to acknowledge that. And so let's talk about it now. There's a couple pieces to this. Number one, overall, the Wolves are out rebounded in this game by 4 rebounds. I think it was only the second time that they were out rebounded. I know there was at least one game where they were even on the glass with the opponent. I don't want this to be a trend, and giving up 19 offensive rebounds to the Warriors, that's not great. 10 of those were in the first quarter and a half of this game. I think I have that about right. Almost half of them were in the first quarter, right? And it got a little better as the game went on. And I don't know that it was necessarily a case of the Wolves being sloppy or slow like they were for a lot of the time last year in the defensive glass. A good chunk of it was simply the Warriors were shooting threes. And so, of course, there's going to be long rebounds. There were a couple of weird bounces, like Cat has inside position, and it bounces at a weird angle behind the backboard. And so the guy, Kuminga or whoever it was, he was boxing, or I guess it was probably Kevon Looney. There were a couple of those where Cat's got position, it bounces over his head into the side, and so Looney gets it. And, just weird rebounds where guys are snaking in to get them, and just, things that you're not necessarily expecting to happen. And part of that, when a team shoots 43 threes, there's going to be some long rebounds and some fluky stuff. That said, there were, of those, call it the first 10, there were at least 3 that are pretty inexcusable. And that's how you end up losing a game to a good team, is you give up a couple of extra possessions, and all of a sudden, that's why the game was close, right? The Wolves were only up by 3 at halftime, and the Warriors were shooting the ball miserably. There was no reason the Wolves shouldn't have been up double digits. It was mostly the defensive rebounding issues. And as I always say, there's 3 ways to end a possession for the opposing team, right? A made shot, a missed shot, a rebound, or a turnover. The Wolves were generating a few turnovers, but early in the game, not a whole lot. The Warriors were missing a ton of shots, but turns out those possessions aren't over until you get a defensive rebound. And that was the Wolves' biggest issue early. To their credit, they did enough offensively themselves and were so good defensively, took the Warriors so many shots to get, to score, that they were still up by a possession at halftime, and they really corrected it as the game went on. And also the offense became less sloppy as the game went on for the Wolves too. So in general, a lot of those problems were solved by halftime, in my opinion. I want to spend a good chunk of the rest of the show talking about the third quarter, and specifically Karl-Anthony Towns. I want to talk about the job Jaden McDaniels did, and obviously the Anthony Edwards thing, a little bit of Ant versus Draymond. We'll talk about Chris Paul. There's a pair of Chris Paul plays I want to talk about today, because I can't not talk about it. I don't like to talk about stuff like this too often on the podcast, but man, I have to today. So we'll talk about all those things next. We'll also do individual studs and duds at the end of the show. Oh, we have to talk about Rudy too when we talk defense. There's so much to get to. We're going to get to all of it here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They're the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch your winnings roll in. With the basketball season underway, you can pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League. Sunday is a great time to do that. It's a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, you could pick LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo, 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made plus receptions. Monday night, by the way, the Wolves don't play Monday night, but pick your favorite NBA game on the schedule. There's many plus Monday Night Football. Pick a couple players at a couple categories and take the combined more than or less than. Plus, PrizePicks offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform that has an injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA, code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, a big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, everydayers, we're back again tomorrow. On Tuesday, we will preview I guess it's the Warriors again Tuesday night. So we won't spend a lot of time previewing, but we'll talk about, based on what happened on Sunday, keys to the rematch with the Warriors. And of course, it's an NBA in-season tournament game Tuesday night too. So get excited for another gaudy court that the Wolves will be playing on. So we'll talk about all that on Tuesday's show. Of course, we're daily throughout the week, live postcasts as well over at Locked On Sports Minnesota following games. So make sure you're following and subscribe to this show everywhere, as well as Locked On Sports Minnesota. All right. Still so much to talk about. Let's talk third quarter. This was Karl-Anthony Towns' time. I don't have his exact quarter stats in front of me, but he was dominant, and the Wolves won the third quarter by 13 points. There was a stretch where it was just all cat. Pump fake and drive. Dario Saric had no chance of guarding him. Third quarter was also an Ant had his monster dunk, by the way, over Saric, which was just phenomenal. Very reminiscent to the one against the Raptors in fall of 21 with no fans in the stands, I believe it was. Just an incredible dunk. Anyway, Saric was put in a bad way in a lot of places in this game, but Karl-Anthony Towns was fantastic, especially in the third, both ends of the floor. We have not talked enough. I've talked about it a little bit on the show. I'll say in general, I'm not going to call just myself out. We haven't talked enough collectively as a Timberwolves community about Karl-Anthony Towns' defense this year, and it's been a thankless job. People talk about the Wolves defense as if he's the weak link, as if he's the one that has to get along. And you've heard it on a national podcast or two, I'm sure, talking about, does he have to be the Robin? I love, by the way, Jim Peterson on Bally Sports North, the Timberwolves broadcast, talking about how Cat doesn't need to be anybody's Robin. The Wolves, he didn't say these words. I'll say it this way. The Wolves could have two Batmen, whatever. Like, why not? And Karl-Anthony Towns was the guy in the third quarter. And he was far more efficient than Anthony Edwards was in this game. I thought in this game in particular, his defense stood out more and played well defensively. We already talked about Wiggins' practically non-existent line. But Cat was fantastic, flying around, getting through screens, switching. The Wolves switched a few times on the perimeter, and Cat was on point, fighting through screens, like just showing an urgency, I think, is the best way to describe it, that we have not seen from Karl-Anthony Towns defensively with consistency. He's done it at times. There's been flashes. Cat, and I've been saying this for 2 years, he's improved steadily defensively since Chris Finch took over. Part of that is the schemes. I just think they've done a better job than the Ryan Saunders, David Vanterpool coaching staff did. And I think he's just a smarter, better player than he was when Tom Thibodeau was the coach. And he also had flashes of being solid defensively under Tibbs too. It was a different scheme. Cal, he's being asked to do so many things outside of what normally would be considered his comfort zone. He's really good defensively, or he has been really through 9 games so far this year. Cat was very good on both ends of the floor in the third quarter. He finished this on a 21-14, 8-14 shooting. I think the order, if I'm not mistaken, the sequence was tough shot in the paint. I think it was a quick post move in the paint. Then he hits a 3-pointer, then a pump fake and drive, gets to the left hand. There was one where he spun middle, hit a little hook. Like it was like essentially 3 out of 4 possessions, something like that, where he scored in 3 different ways, showed the versatility of his game, reminded people, hey, I'm a multi-time All-Star, a 3-time All-Star, a 2-time All-NBA third-team player. I'm nobody's Robin, and I'm not going to just be traded. Shout out Brian Windhorst for that. There's a time and a place for that conversation, by the way. I had it all summer long on this show, right? I understand the reason why we want to talk Karl-Anthony Towns, whatever, the contract stuff. Like, I get it. The second apron, the Supermax kicking in. It's legitimate for that reason. If you're not familiar, like, go back and listen to those shows. The Wolves trade Cat conversation, that's a legitimate conversation to have within the walls of the Wolves front office, because you always have to be planning ahead. It's not a legitimate conversation for anyone to be having in this moment with the Wolves at 7-2 and one of the best teams in the NBA. And Karl-Anthony Towns playing 3 consecutive fantastic games and fitting this role perfectly. The Wolves, there's a 0% chance, 0% chance Karl-Anthony Towns is traded in season this year if the Wolves are playing remotely this well over the next 6, 8, 10 weeks. I won't talk about it on the show. This is it until I have to, closer to the deadline. I just wanted to put that out there because I know that quote was floating around the Twitter sphere, X sphere, whatever, today or on Sunday. Anyway, Cat was fantastic. Both ends of the floor, really, really, really good in the third quarter. And then as we get into the fourth, it's Anthony Edwards that does the thing where Anthony Edwards takes over. And there was a small window in the fourth quarter where he launched 3 after 3. The Wolves got an offensive rebound. He literally dribbled out the 14-second shot clock, shot a flat-footed 3 from the left wing. It was like 3 or 4 threes consecutively. He missed all of them, a couple of them badly. He just didn't have legs at that point in the game to be launching flat-footed threes. It didn't make sense. Besides that, though, I can't complain about anything with Ant's performance. Of course, he got that technical after the massive dunk, that's another soapbox. I'll have that another day when it's more relevant to the outcome of the game. But it was like, I think he did less than the Giannis one the other day, which was also absurd when Giannis flexed. Ant gave it a small flex. Oh, this is part of my Chris Paul soapbox. So I want to do that now. Let's hold that for the next segment. I'll do my Chris Paul segment, my Chris Paul soapbox next segment. I'll get back to the Ant tee because Chris Paul played a part in that too. If you watch the replay carefully. But anyway, Ant was fantastic in the fourth quarter. He used the technical and then the Draymond after Draymond fouls Ant on the right side of the basket in the open floor in a fast break situation. They have the back and forth a little bit. Thank goodness the officials didn't feel the need to call technicals there. We've seen them call technicals for less just minutes before that, but everybody knew Ant already had the one, right? And Draymond's Draymond. And then Ant from that point forward said, all right, well, I'm just going to take this thing over. Scored a couple times in the paint. There was the one where the ball got pushed up the floor. There were 4 Warriors back, and Ant just goes, oh, if Wiggins isn't actually going to guard me, there's my other Wiggins mention. I didn't think we'd get back there, but Ant just cooked him. He said, okay, you're going to do the thing like you did when you were in a Timberwolves uniform and you just aren't going to get into a stance. So I'm going to go right past you and score because I can't. And that was Anthony Edwards in this game. Like he said, you're firing up the wrong guy. I'm just going to go score a bucket. And then later he hit the turnaround over Draymond at about the free throw line. Draymond just got completely knocked off balance. Ant drains it. And then Curry ends up on Ant on the switch and effectively the dagger from the right side, the just silky fadeaway off the glass, like just an unbelievable shot. And those are the moments where you're fine that he's doing that, right? Those are totally fine. Those moments, those ISO moments, he can score over Steph. He can take Draymond off the dribble. So just let him do it. It's the flat-footed threes when you're in the half-court offense and everybody's just kind of standing around that we can't have. Now, didn't ultimately matter because the Wolves won relatively comfortably, but that was, something to look out for. One last thing here related to the defense. I got to talk a little bit about Rudy. Gobert had 5 blocks, which was a season high, of course, for him. And he struggled at the free throw line again. He was 2 of 8, missed a pair 4 different times. Nope, that's not good math. 3 different times he missed both free throws. Once he made both free throws. Ended with 10 and 10 and 5. The Wolves offense at times especially in the first half, felt like they were trying a little too hard to force the ball to Rudy. Ultimately, I think it led to a couple turnovers. It certainly led to a Kyle Anderson turnover too. Rudy, I think, got a turnover once because it was a bad pass and he grabbed the ball and then dribbled it out of bounds. It was a little clunky at times. It had more shades of last year than this year offensively, but there were a couple of times where it looked really natural. And Rudy simply is just like, again, he's moving better. He's catching the ball better. Everything about Rudy's game looks better. Defensively, the Warriors were petrified of Rudy Gobert. I'm pretty sure Steph and Saric are going to be seeing Rudy in their sleep tonight. There was the one where Dario Saric pump faked like 4 times. This was late in the game and missed the shot. And they got the putback from Looney or Kuminga or somebody. But Rudy was, again, fantastic. He just is omnipresent when he's on the floor. The Wolves are like, I think they're giving up. I don't have the percentage in front of me, but the essentially the rim protection numbers with Rudy on the floor are just astronomical. It's absolutely Rudy from 2-3 years ago. And that was my biggest note from this game up until the Ant flurry in the fourth quarter. But Rudy just, like, I get it now watching him every day, this version of Rudy, how he won Defensive Player of the Year awards. It was one of those things where, like, I don't know. The impact is so real of what he does when he's on the floor, completely changes the way the other team plays the game. I want to get on my Chris Paul soapbox. I want to talk individual studs and duds, shout out a couple more guys as well. And we'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Jace Medical. We spend a lot of time here on the podcast together. We get fired up together on wins and losses, who starts and who sits. And absolutely thankful for all the listeners for the show. Let's talk about something a little bit more serious, but that's our friends at Jace Medical. And of course, the Jace case. If you're worried about the unexpected, because you never know what's going to happen next in the world, supply chain issues, etc., don't worry. You're covered with Jace Medical. You don't have to worry about whether or not you can refill your generics, different prescriptions, whatever it might be, with our friends at Jace Medical. That includes prescriptions like Cialis, Viagra, or Revatio. It's all possible because of our friends at Jace Medical. Go online right now at jacemedical.com to receive your 12-month supply on your daily medication. Remember to use the promo code LOCKEDON at checkout for a discount. A verified customer had the following to say about Jace, quote, "I am thankful for the service. Supply chain issues caused me to cut pills in half to have it. I ordered most of my daily meds with a year's supply. I also ordered an antibiotic kit. I feel secure now. Prices are lower than local pharmacies. I highly recommend this for everyone," end quote. If you or someone you love would get some peace of mind by having a year's supply of any daily med, go to jacemedical.com to see if it's offered for you. Remember to use our promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your purchase. All right, let's close this thing out by talking. I want to talk Chris Paul. Let's do that next. So we've all seen the clip on X of Chris Paul rolling into Mike Conley's legs and then Mike Conley getting called inexplicably for a foul on that play. I don't have much else to add to that, other than if you haven't seen it, go watch it. It maybe isn't surprising for somebody who's supposedly, I don't know, thought of as a good guy, a player rep for the Player Association for a long time, or whatever his role was there. That's not a clean play, and this is less important because of how dirty that play was. And it was dirty. Let's call it what it is. You can see him on the replay. He knows what he's doing. He's just, and I don't know that he's calculating in his head, like, I'm trying to end Mike Conley's career. I'm not saying he's doing that, but he's intentionally rolling into the legs of Conley to either try and draw a foul or maybe just, knock more guys. That, like, I guess I don't know what the point of it is if you're not making that calculation, right? Because he had the ball. So it's not like he was still going for the ball or like trying to knock over the guy with the ball, which would still be a dirty play. So I'll leave that alone besides that. But also, this is less important, but more annoying to me. No, that's not right. It's not more annoying. It was more annoying to me because I saw it happen live after the Ant technical. If you watch on the replay, he doesn't get called for it right away. You know when he gets called for it? It's when Chris Paul hears what Ant says, because he's saying ball, ball, ball. He wants the ball to be inbounded. He hears Ant say something. He looks at the official. It wasn't Mark Davis. I forget who it was. Down on the baseline. And he goes, whoa, 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 whoa. It was exactly shades of the Jordan Bell jersey untucked, thing in Oklahoma City from, what was it, 3 years ago? When he called for the delay of game from Scott Foster, and it affected the end of that game against Oklahoma City. Exactly the same thing. The ref doesn't blow the whistle until Chris Paul asks him to blow the whistle for something as petty as a technical for he said like one thing. And I don't even think it was like magic words, right? Whatever Ant said when he briefly flexed, again, a tamer flex than the Giannis flex from the other night. And then Chris Paul says, whoa, that should be a technical. And it's a technical. I don't know. It's that, and it's the play against Conley. I don't know what else there is to say at this point. It's just obnoxious, and I just don't understand how officials are falling for it still. I understand the guy gets a fair amount of respect. He's an incredible point guard. We know that. But I just don't know how you're falling for this stuff. Like how the officials are with a straight face letting Chris Paul call technicals for them. It's just crazy. All right. Last couple things here. I touched on some of this stuff a minute ago, but in terms of box score stats, the Wolves again holding a team under 40% for the 5th time in 6 games, and the 7th time in 9 games they've held an opponent under 41% shooting. The Wolves did not shoot the ball well from 3 in this game. Well, I shouldn't say that. They shot the ball okay from 3. They didn't get up enough 3-point attempts in this game. That's been a recurring theme this season, and we know Chris Finch wants to shoot more threes. Rebounding, turnovers were even. The Wolves were very sloppy early. The Warriors caught up in that department late in terms of just turning the ball over themselves, is what I mean by that. The Wolves are a -4 in the rebound department, but given that Golden State had 19 offensive rebounds, the fact that they only had, let's see, I lost it here, but I think they only had 10 more second chance points than the Wolves, despite having 10 more offensive rebounds. That number you'd think would be higher. So the Wolves lucked out a little bit there. And also, I shouldn't say lucked out. The Wolves also, they just defended well, right? There's a reason why that field goal percentage is so incredibly low, because the Wolves defended well. First possession, second opportunities, third opportunities, whatever. The Wolves defended well. They also didn't foul much at all until the end of the game. McDaniels got called for 3 fouls almost consecutively late. Golden State ended up attempting 28 free throws, but a bunch of those were in the fourth quarter. The Wolves in general defended well without fouling in this game. So I thought I just wanted to point that out. All right, studs and duds. We have to talk, of course, we talked Ant already. I'll throw his stats up if you're watching on YouTube. 33 points, 7 assists, 6 rebounds in this game for Anthony Edwards. Yeah, the 11 of 27 is a bit unsightly. He was 1 of 9 outside the arc. You take that out, he's 10 of 18 on twos. 10 of 18 on twos is pretty good. 10 of 10 at the free throw line, very good. A very good 3-point shooting, or excuse me, free throw shooting performance from Ant. Now he's on 3 straight games. I think he was like 2 of 7 on Wednesday, 2 of 8 on Friday against the Spurs from 3. Now 1 of 9 in this game. So the 3-point shooting has completely come back down to earth. He was over 50% through the first 6 games this year. So this slide won't continue. He's obviously somewhere in the middle is the right answer. He's probably going to be a 37-ish% 3-point shooter this year, a volume 3-point shooter, very effective 3-point shooter. So expect that to bounce back a little. So it was really good to see him get to the line so much in a game where his deep ball wasn't falling. And again, outside that stretch of possessions in the fourth, I thought in general his decision-making was pretty solid in this game. So he's obviously a stud. I also want to give one to Karl-Anthony Towns. We talked about his two-way performance in this game. His line was 21 and 14, 8 of 14 shooting, 2 of 3 on threes, a perfect 3 of 3 at the line, 3 assists, 2 steals, and a block in this game, only 1 turnover. He and Cat and Ant were the only 2 Timberwolves that had a plus-minus mark of over in double figures. Ant was a plus 15, Cat was a plus 11. My third stud for this game, I'm going to give it to Rudy Gobert, but I want to talk about a couple of bench players who also played really well in this game here in a minute. Rudy had 10 and 10, 4 of 7 from the field, struggled again at the line, 2 of 8, not quite as bad as whatever it was last Wednesday. I don't know, what was it? 1 of 10 or 2 of 12 or something crazy. 2 of 8 in this game from the line, but again, the 10 rebounds, including 4 offensive rebounds, 3 assists, a steal, 5 blocks in this game for Rudy, and just monstrously impacted this game on the defensive end of the floor, as we've talked about. We talked about Jaden already. He had 13 points in this game, really good offensively. He had some nice possessions. I think it was early third quarter where he hit a drove and hit a reverse layup, and then the next possession hit a corner 3 when they didn't close out on him. First possession of the game, by the way, the Warriors put Steph on Jaden, and he took him in the post and scored, dropped him off at the rim. So Jaden is really starting to be very comfortable taking advantage of these mismatches teams throw at him just to try and gain an advantage somewhere else. Really good offensive game, really good defensive game. Another poor rebounding game for him. No rebounds in 35 minutes, which is hard to not stumble across one. I get it. He's expending a ton of energy. And this is a little bit understandable because he's facing Chris Paul, chasing Steph Curry around the floor the whole game. So I'm not gonna take him to task too much for the no rebounds in this one. 13 points, 6 of 8 shooting. Fantastic defense for Jaden. Let's also talk. I want to talk to Alexander Walker, and maybe I'll spend a little more time on him later this week. This is a third straight really strong game for Na. 10 points on 4 of 6 shooting, 2 of 3 on threes. Hit a couple of threes where the ball got swung to him and the Warriors left him open. And I get it. It's pick your poison. Is it Ant? Is it Cat? Is it Conley? Well, of the 4 of them, Alexander Walker is the one that you take your chances with if you're Golden State, right? He knocked it down a couple times in this game. Also had a strong take to the basket. Just another really good game. And he is very much the light version of Jaden McDaniels for this team. And when he's playing well off the bench and you combine their offensive numbers, and they share the floor some, obviously, but you combine their numbers in this game, they shot a combined 10 of 14 from the field, 3 of 5 from outside the arc for 23 points, 2 assists, no turnovers. I mean, like that, you can't ask for much more out of your top perimeter defenders, right? Nas also a quietly solid game. Had a nice first half, 10 points, 6 rebounds. He only played 19 minutes in this one. Rudy had 35. Cat had 37. It's going to happen occasionally. In certain matchups, you're going to see less of one of the 3, and in most cases, that's Nas losing out. But, I mean, it was still a good performance for Naz Reid for sure. I don't have any duds in this game. Shake had a quiet game. I don't think he played badly. I thought he was pretty good defensively. A very quiet box score. So if I had to pick one, it would be Shake Milton. But I don't. He's not a real dud. I thought he played fine. Kyle Anderson continues to have some weird turnover issues. I'd expect those to be straightened out, but he had a couple of other bad ones, and he missed those 2 free throws that could have sealed the game a few minutes earlier in real lifetime. At the end of this one, he's been a little bit shaky lately. Not worried about it. Slow-mo's fine. Just a weird slow-mo game again. He was perfect from the field, but had the 3 turnovers and those missed free throws. In general, a really impressive performance from the Timberwolves in this game. There's not much else to say. I said on Twitter or on X, this is another example of a game the Wolves would not have probably won last year. And the Spurs game is one example of that. I said on the live postcast, Jack and I talked about this Friday night. I mean, the Wolves, that felt like a game the Wolves could have lost because they were playing an inferior team and they just kind of messed around for 2.5 quarters or whatever on Friday, and they still ended up winning. This is different in that they played well against a good team, but not quite well enough, and they probably would have let it slip away in the second half last year. That's just what it feels like. They probably wouldn't have won, but for different reasons than the Friday game. And yet, it never really felt like they were going to let this one get out of control. So, a really, really strong overall performance from the Wolves, and we'll hopefully see more of it Tuesday night. Of course, that's an NBA in-season tournament game, and we'll have to see if there's any lingering anything from the brief Nas Kuminga dust up in the first half from this one, the Draymond Ant stuff from the second half, the Chris Paul thing. Who knows? And also with the in-season tournament, we'll see if there's any additional fire that anyone plays with. It's always hard to beat a team 2 consecutive times, especially when it's within 2 days and on their home floor for both of them. So Tuesday is going to be really tough for the Wolves. It's also the front end of a back-to-back. I didn't mention this earlier. This was the second half of a back-to-back for Golden State. That matters, of course. The Wolves have the first half of a back-to-back Tuesday, then they go to Phoenix on Wednesday night. So we'll see how it all shakes out. Of course, we'll talk about that on Tuesday's show. We'll break down a few of those different things to look out for based on this game. We'll peek ahead at the rest of the week as the road trip continues for Minnesota. It's exciting. The Wolves are 7-2. We'll talk about their standing overall in the West. We'll check in on the defensive rating, all that good stuff on the show Tuesday as well. And then, of course, the postgame pod Wednesday after Tuesday night's Wolves-Warriors game. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, the show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.